Dawn spilled a thin, pewter light over the tobacco rose, and the heat was already hiding beneath the leaves like a snake that knew its hour would come. Sabria Lark felt it at the edges of her skin, Marilyn's breath, humid and humming, and she counted the steps from the quarters to the river as if each number might bargain her one more day. She carried a bundle of brittle kindling under her arm and the small iron kettle in her hand, the one with the lip she had filed some seasons ago so it poured without a drip. In the hedgerow the cicadas tuned their throats. On the porch of the big house, a bottle clinked as the wind nudged it into truth. Sabria kept her eyes on the river. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The Patuxent ran brown and thoughtful beyond the cane brake, and Sabria knew its moods better than she knew her own, the quick silver it put on when the moon sat high, the way it deepened to iron when storm catoned over the sky. She knew where a scow would ground at low tide, and where eelgrass made a velvet trap for keel and oar. The river had watched her grow from a girl carrying ash water to a woman who could guide a flat bottom in fog with only a rope's whisper for a compass. That was one of her skills, river wisdom, taught by nights stolen from sleep and mornings that pulled her across the water with a quiet, muscular kind of patience. Her other skill was a secret kept behind her tongue: she could read. Not in proud, loud fashion with books in a sunlit parlor, she read the way a fox runs, silent and low to the ground. A broken primer left by a departing tutor had slipped to the kitchen hearth years ago, and Sabria coaxed its ashes back to letters in her head, duplicating them later in flour dust on the boards when no one watched. She studied the labels on barrels, the godly verses etched inside a Quaker man's pocket Bible, the shipping notices the master, Orrin Marsh, left lying like threats on the dining table. When she had to, she folded meaning inside recipes, a pinch of baking soda in place of a word, nutmeg where a number should be. Her literacy moved like the river beneath reeds. Orrin Marsh had a son by his lawful wife, a pale-shouldered boy named Hartwell who spoke with the overstretched vowels of the eastern shore, and he had other children too, children the ledger didn't call his, children kept as inventory. Sabria was one of those children. She had his chin in his eyes, and he had once ruffled her hair when she was very small, a touch she could not place without nausea. Years passed and the nausea hardened into a bitter salt that lived at the bend of her jaw. He visited the quarters like a man visits his own shadow, pretending it belongs to someone else. There was a third skill. Sabria could make a kitchen run like a clock, even when the clock was broken and the hands were missing. She could cure meat with only a measure of smoke and a prayer, draw sweetness from a molasses so scorched it smelled like sorrow, and coax a biscuit to rise soft in a hearth that yielded only coals. This kept her near the big house, nearer than she wanted, but proximity made a hiding place for other intentions, and Sabria wore that knowledge like a second skin. That morning she made coffee the way the overseer liked it, then changed it at the last moment, letting the liquid go from bitter to almost kind. She took a tin cup for herself out to the river, where reeds leaned like eavesdroppers. She was listening. Not for birds, those were always talking, but for the human rustle that meant news. It came with a twig crack and a breath in the cattails. A figure rose, damp to the knees and smiling the way a person smiles when the thing they carry is too large to show in the open. It was Red Jacob, called so because his hair in childhood had held a copper stubbornness, now turned to brown wool. He lived on the neighboring farm and mended nets for the creek people. His real work, the work that mattered, was ferrying words along the water. "You come early," Sabria said, each syllable casual as a floating leaf. "Daybreak is when the river tells the truth," Jacob answered. "Got you 2 truths today." He tapped his cap brim as if it were a code. Sabria lowered her lashes. "Say the first." Jacob gave her the first truth like a coin delivered in a handshake. "A schooner docked at Benedict yesterday. Can't find crew. Smell of tar on a Sunday means trouble." He looked past her shoulder at the house with its tall windows half awake. "Captain is asking for marsh tobacco, 2 bales more than promised. Your master owes." "A debt's a leash, Sabria." She nodded once. Debt was a leash, but it was also a door if you could persuade the hinge. "And the second?" "The second's bigger." Jacob swallowed, his throat tight. A station keeper on the North Road was taken last week. A woman. Had a little boy with her that folks hid. She didn't give up any names, far as we know, but the marshals are sniffing like hounds now. They'll come through here, or they'll stand on the far bank and listen for a wrong sound. Sabria stilled. Wind raked the reeds. In her mind the letters of her world rearranged themselves as if on a table: debt, schooner, marshals, woman, boy. She saw, in that swift and dangerous way a keen mind sees when afraid, the shape of a path that might lead out and the cost it demanded. Any boy named? Sabria asked. Jacob shook his head. Only that he likes to count buttons and that he don't sleep unless he hears a river talk. That makes him ours, Sabria whispered, not to Jacob but to the water, which listened without judgment. Where is he? Hidden in St. Luke's shed. The old vestry house with the rusted lock. Preacher's gone to visit kin across the bay. Sabria's fingers found the lip of her kettle. She did not tighten them. She kept her body as loose as the morning asked, an animal conserving strength. Come back afternoon. Bring a broken net and a story about fish. I'll have bread for you. Jacob's eyes softened. He knew what bread meant when she said it like that, bread with messages baked into the slashes on its top, letters disguised as artistry. Take care, he murmured, and sank back into the reeds as if the river had grown him. Sabria returned to the kitchen with her hair damp and her resolve bright. The house itself had a smell that was both perfume and ash. The mistress, Belinda Marsh, preferred lavender satchels in the linens and used lice so strong it could burn a new name into your palms if you forgot gloves. On the dining table lay the master's shipping letters, fanned out like dead birds. She moved around them without touching, attentive to their weights and angles. The buttery's door stuck the way it did in summer, swollen with heat. She took flour and the last of the nutmeg, hiding the latter in her pocket. Nutmeg was a letter in her private alphabet. In the scullery, Sally, young and quick and always on the edge of a song, was polishing spoons with a rag made from a shirt that used to fit Sabria's shoulders when she was 14. Miss Lark, Sally said, she called her that as a small rebellion, the mistress is in a temper over the parlor drapes. Says the sun burns the upholstery, but the sun don't take orders. The sun don't, Sabria agreed. Make her a cold drink. Lemon, vinegar, dash of molasses. Keeps the mouth busy while the hands forget what they were mad about. Sally grinned. You teaching me kitchen sorcery again. Only enough to keep you safe. Sabria kneaded dough with the heel of her hand, working air into it, thinking of the woman at the station and the boy who needed the river's voice to sleep. Dough took patience and faith, both were currencies she had learned to store in small jars behind her ribs. While her hands turned the dough, her mind walked to St. Luke's, the vestry house leaning into its own shadow, the lock with its mouth open to rust. She knew how to make a key where there wasn't one. A sliver of tin, a stroke of file, the feel of tumblers through the pad of a thumb. Hartwell Marsh sauntered into the kitchen in his shirt sleeves, his hair damp from a lazy wash. He had the soft hands Sabria despised because they reminded her of the softness that could wield a whip just as surely as a hard hand could. He took a heel of bread from the previous day and bit into it as if he owned hunger itself. Pa says the Benedict schooner is short crew, he remarked through crumbs. He says we might have to send hands downriver. The dough pressed cool against Sabria's palm. Ain't my place to say, she murmured. Nothing here is your place to say, Hartwell replied, cheerful, which made it worse. He glanced around as if looking for mischief he had left behind. Ma wants cinnamon in the custard. Can you make that happen? If there's cinnamon to be had. I'll tell her there is. He winked, the gesture guileless and practiced. Then his gaze snagged on Sabria's face and something speculative passed over it, a cruel curiosity the way boys of a certain making try stones on glass. You favor Pa when you look straight on. Sabria lifted the dough and set it to rise, her face a still pond under which creatures lived. Many favor many when looking straight on, she said. He laughed, enjoying the riddle, and left. When the bread came out, its crust thumbed with slashes, Sabria took a small loaf aside and cut the marks again, adjusting them into a pattern only someone primed would notice: 2 short, 1 long, 1 short, the route to St. Luke's from the north fence, and then 3 faint cuts like the faint tick of a clock. Wait until blue hour, just after the whippoorwill sings. She wrapped the loaf in cloth and set it by the back door. For Jacob. The rest of the day arranged itself around the mistress's discontent, which was a weather of its own. Sabria moved through it like a tall grass, bending where needed, straightening after. She repaired a torn fly screen with thread the color of resignation. She taught Sally how to judge meringue by the incline of its peaks. She broke the day into salvaged minutes and stored them like beads. And always her mind counted: letters to the river, steps to the vestry house, the measure of a lock's patience. At sundown, the marshes breathed hot as if they had run a long way. The big house took on the color it wore when it wanted to pretend it had never been cruel. Music from the parlor, Hartwell at the square piano, hammering out a hymn's bones, drifted to the yard and made the air feel like Sunday. Sabria slipped along the fence line with a basket on her arm and the excuse of berries on her tongue. "Where you going, Lark?" asked Cato, the yard man, a deep lines of worry etched around his eyes that were too old for his 20 years. "To the bramble patch before the birds take what the heat left," she said, lifting the basket. She caught his gaze. He had been a boy when she taught him how to count the lashes by counting breaths, how to cry without sound. Now he was a man who could carry 3 barrels at once and still make room in his body for gentleness. She let him see it, the urgency buried in her composure. He gave the smallest nod and turned his face toward the barn, his body becoming a question to anyone who might be watching. Did the latch need fixing? Did the rope look frayed? Harmless questions are good covers. The vestry house slept at the edge of the churchyard like an old dog. St. Luke's itself had brick shoulders and a spire that appeared to be pointing not to heaven but to some exact spot on the river, as if readying a testimony. Sabria moved inside the fence's shadow, a braid of twilight and intention. She kept the basket on one arm and, with the other, rolled the bit of tin she had shaped under her thumb. The lock was an old friend, stubborn but proud. She listened to it the way she listened to the river. There, the first tumbler agreeing to be known; there, the second, reluctant but not inviolate; there, the last, which required a promise. "Please," she breathed, not to the metal but to the world that had put metal between a child and safety. The lock side open. Inside, the air carried the perfume of dust and old books, the kind of smell that made Sabria's chest tighten because it reminded her of words left unread on purpose. The boy slept in a corner behind a stack of cracked hymnals, his body tucked in on itself like a comma at the end of a rushed sentence. He woke before she reached him, eyes open and already listening for the water. His hair kinked against his head and his lips were chapped where fear had rubbed them. Sabria knelt, making herself as small as a river rock. "My name is Sabria Lark," she said softly. "I know the river. I can take you to it. But we must move quiet." He studied her with the solemn gravity of children who have watched adults fail them. "You know the river's names?" he whispered. "All of them." She smiled, lifting the basket. "And the names they call themselves when nobody's listening." He stood, small bones clicking like dials. "I'm called Bertie," he said, and Sabria's throat hurt with the rightness of it, for the child did look like a creature who knew the sky and resented gravity. "My mama said to keep counting until she came back." "Then we'll count steps," Sabria said, offering him her hand. "And each step will be a number that brings her closer, whether she is near or far." They slipped out. The blue hour wrapped them. Whippoorwill call stitched the trees. Sabria knew each patch of ground, which grass whispered and which swallowed footfalls whole. She folded Bertie into her shadow when a cart rolled by on the road and kept her body as an answer to any question a stranger might ask with his eyes. At the fence, Cato's silhouette was a reassurance. He leaned as if he had never known urgency, and yet when Sabria and Bertie reached him he shifted so their steps were hidden inside his moving bulk. "Were you taking him?" Cato murmured without moving his mouth. "To the river tonight," Sabria said. "And then to Mrs. Albright's place. She knows the side creeks, can hide a child inside a wash basket and make the world say please." Cato's smile flickered. I'll walk the fence long, he said. If anyone asks, I'll say the latch is in love with the post and they won't stop kissing. In the canoe, the river lifted them without comment. Sabria gave Bertie the rope to hold because she knew the comfort children find in being given a job. He counted knots under his breath, and the tide answered with a hush-hush that let him rest his head without sleeping. Sabria pulled them through eelgrass that clung like worries and then released like forgiveness. The moon rose not as witness but as companion. Mrs. Albright's place looked like the kind of house sorrow had made sensible. Widow for 20 years, hair the color of tin, eyes with more kindness than fuss, she had learned how to salt words so they kept. She met Sabria at the back stoop with a cloth already laid on her arms for a bundle that looked like laundry and was not. Hush now, she told Bertie, which sounded as much like a blessing as an instruction. There's a sack of beans that needs your listening. Every bean tells you a number if you hold it to your ear. Bertie solemnly took the sack and listened. This one says 3, he whispered. Then 3 is a fine number to keep for the night. Mrs. Albright looked up at Sabria. Marshall's been sniffing, she said. They had a taste for righteousness and got drunk. I know. Sabria set the canoe pole against the steps. A schooner's at Benedict looking for hands. Dead is at the door, the kind that makes men kick something smaller than it is. Mrs. Albright's eyes dimmed. And you, she asked, voice lowered to the space between two breaths. I am a hinge, Sabria said. I am trying to persuade the door. The older woman nodded. I can keep him until morning. After that, the willets on the marsh road can pass him like a message to the next hand. But you must be here, Sabria. There's talk about your house. Orrin Marsh's anger has been eating at itself and it's hungry for more. I'm part of what it wants, Sabria said without flinching. But I won't feed it. On the way back, the river changed. It had the taste of copper, it sucked at the canoe as if wanting to keep them. Fog rose like a thought that won't be dismissed. Sabria's chest tightened with a certainty she hated. Violence had already woken somewhere inland. When she slid the canoe into the reeds near the quarters and stepped onto the bank, the wind brought her a scent that made her teeth hurt. Whiskey and rage. Orrin Marsh stood near the smokehouse with a lantern creating a cruel circus of light around him. The overseer loomed to his right. Hartwell to his left. The three of them arranged like instruments of a song Sabria had learned by rote, accusation first, then inspection, then punishment. Where you been? Orrin asked, his eyes a pale, unkind color even in dark. He always called her by her given name, Sabria, and there was a way he said it that placed his hand on it. I saw you head toward the church with your basket like a prayer. You think I don't know what prayers look like when they ain't for me? The quarters had gone quiet. That was the way people protected each other, by giving silence a body to wear. Sabria kept her voice mild. Mistress sent me for berries. At night? Orrin sniffed. Berries sleep when I do. He handed the lantern to the overseer and reached for Sabria's arm. It required every trained stillness she owned not to pull away. His fingers were the weight of his ownership and the proof of his fear. You favor me, he said, and the words slid into the cruelest corner of the night. Look at me. She looked at him, and in the looking she did not blink. The man who had fathered her wore his age like a knife kept sharp for no good reason. The bourbon on his breath was old as prayer. In his face she saw the boy he had been, the boy Hartwell still was, friendships with power, a terror of softness, a certainty that the world existed for their use. The river ran behind her spine, steady as doctrine. You goin' to the church for God, Orrin said softly, leaning so close she could count the pores in his skin, or for the niggers that think a north wind is freedom? For berries, Sabria said, the truth turning in her mouth to keep its edges from cutting her. And to cool my head. He smiled without humor. I'll cool it for you. He raised his hand, not for the blow, not yet, but to test the air between them the way a man tests a horse. You think I don't know what you are? He glanced at Hartwell as if asking permission to be uglier. You're what happens when the field is sowed where it shouldn't be. Hartwell's face flickered the way a candle does in a draft. Shame moved across him like a shadow not entirely his own, then left him the same. "Pa," he murmured, "Ma's looking." Oren's gaze never left Sabria. "Your ma looks when I tell her to," he said, as if Hartwell had needed reminding who taught his mother to blink. "And I'm looking now." His hand came down, not a slap but a grasp at her jaw, fingers pressing until Sabria felt the bones protest. For one brash second the urge to bite him rose in her like something holy. "Let her go," Cato said from somewhere near the barn, his voice low but not small. The overseer moved a little. His body said, "Choose your next breath carefully." Oren released her with a shove that tilted the knight. "Get to the kitchen," he snarled. "Make my debt sweet. We got men to feed for Benedict. You'll need until dawn and you'll thank me for giving your hands a job." Sabria's jaw sang with pain, and with it sang a clarity she had not courted, a line, finally visible, between fear and something sharper. She lowered her eyes as the knight demanded but let the river in her back remain straight. "Yes, sir," she said, the syllables smooth as river stones. She turned to go, and in turning, she shelved rage where she kept spices, labeled, lidded, but potent when called. Inside the kitchen, the hearth was a black mouth. Sabria built a fire as if building a small nation. Sally crept in from the pantry with eyes wide. "I heard," she whispered. "I heard him say." "Don't set it in your mouth," Sabria said gently. "It don't deserve a second life on your tongue." She laid out bowls and measured flour by the small of her hand. The clock ticked like a jealous neighbor. "We have work." "What work?" "The kind that turns a debt into a hinge," Sabria said. She looked at the door as if it were listening. "The schooner at Benedict needs hands. Oren means to send some of ours and maybe sell more to cover what he owes. He'll send Cato if he can, and Cato's worth 2 men to all of us." Sally swallowed. "So, how do we stop him?" Sabria drew a quick breath, and in that breath laid out the letters of a plan as if placing them on the table: fire, smoke, rope, river, key. "I'll need you to run a message before dawn," she said. "To Jacob. Tell him the bread says, tonight, after second cockcrow. Tell him to spread the word riverward, creek people, oystermen, the widow with the quiet hands. We'll draw Oren's eyes to the tobacco barn. Smoke will talk louder than anything." Sally's hands trembled. "Fire?" "Not the whole barn," Sabria said. "Just a tongue of flame high enough to lick the roof's edge and make men run. While they run, we'll loosen the moorings at the marsh landing. The schooner captain will come greedy to the smell of free hands, he'll stand where the dock gives least. And where the dock gives least is where I will have pulled 2 pins." Sally stared. "You mean to drop a man in the river?" Sabria's voice did not waver. "I mean to let the river do what the river knows how to do with men who lean where they shouldn't." She paused, the next word a cliff's edge. "And if Oren is the man who leans?" Sally's breath hitched. "I won't show the river more than it asks for," Sabria finished. "But I will not be his hinge anymore." They worked. Dough rose like a promise, butter melted like a secret. Sabria's hands moved in a sure choreography while her mind kept time elsewhere, which rope frayed at which post, which plank on the dock had learned to behave badly when insulted. She found the iron pins under the bench where the boat hooks hung and memorized their patience. She wrapped biscuits in cloth with words tucked into their folds. When at last the house dropped into its late-night posture, a kind of exhausted arrogance, Sabria slipped out the back with Sally like 2 commas between hard sentences. The stars were bright and untouchable. The tobacco barn stood with its doors cracked to the night's breath, the air nearby thick with cured leaf and sweet rot. Sabria had worked there as a girl, her fingers sticky with gum, her lungs learning the slow hurt of that sweetness. She took the lantern. Inside, rows of hanging leaves transformed the dark into a congregation of shadowed bodies. Sally followed, the hem of her skirt whispering. "How do we make a flame that scares but doesn't destroy?" she asked. "Green wood and damp cloth," Sabria said softly. "And a place where smoke can make a fuss without giving tongue to fire. This beam here." She patted a support. We'll show it a breath of lamp, then starve it. Just enough to call men with buckets. They placed a twist of damp burlap and a skim of pine needles and introduced the lantern's wick to them like a warning. A lick of flame tried to speak and Sabria shushed it with a handful of water, leaving it alive enough to complain. Smoke rose at once, eager and accusatory. They ran then, not the way fear runs but the way purpose runs, head down, direction precise. At the dock, the river waited with its enormous, indifferent patience. Sabria set her hands to the first pin and felt its history, the times it had been hammered and the times it had stood there merely to be counted. She eased it free, foot braced, breath measured. Sally kept watch, her hand a small heat on Sabria's shoulder whenever the night rustled wrongly. Shouts broke from the yard. Buckets clanged. Sabria pulled the second pin and laid it on the planks like a decision. Footsteps pounded on the lane that ran to the landing. Orrin's voice rose above them all, the voice a house obeys even when it hates itself for it. Get the buckets. If that barn goes, you go. Hartwell's tone overlapped, shriller, untried. Lights bobbed, lanterns, a comet tail of them. The schooner's captain, true to Jacob's telling, had the nose of a man who had married debt and now sought dowry wherever he could. He strode ahead of two crewmen, boots careless. You got trouble, Marsh, he called, not unkindly, a man's wallet will make a man tender. Just a scare, Orrin said, panting as he arrived, lantern high. He looked at the dock as if it were a promise and stepped onto it without looking. The river held the dock's end like a joke it had waited years to tell. Sabria stood half in shadow, hands calm at her sides, her face turned as if listening to frogs. Sally's breath came thin and high behind her. The captain stepped to the side where the plank had learned to behave badly. He tested it with a heel, found it true because the pin still held on that side. Orrin kicked at a piling with the same anger he had used on Sabria's jaw. Built this myself, he said to no one, which was a lie the river would not tolerate. Pa, Hartwell said, arriving, head shining with sweat, the barn. It'll hold, Orrin snapped, and of course he spoke of the wrong thing. He looked at Sabria then, as if he had felt her attention the way a man feels a hawk. You. Get me a line. He pointed toward the coil of rope by the cleat. She stepped forward, and time staggered in a way only humans notice, because time is often more obedient to water than to clocks. Sabria took the rope. Her fingers remembered every knot she had learned by candlelight, from Cato in a whisper, from fishermen and their laughter, from the river and its patient cruelty. She tied the line to the cleat with a flurry of competence and then, because a hinge does not stay a hinge once it learns it can be a key, she threaded the tail of the rope through the loosened pin's bed. One tug would make the dock's end fold like a knee. Orrin turned, lantern making him into a creature of gold and shadow. He started down the length of the dock toward the captain, speaking of bales and interest and the way men cheerfully turn their pockets inside out when a debt holder smiles. He passed the place where Sabria had laid her change, a rope tail sleeping, a pin's absence dreaming in the hole where it used to be. The river lapped. Sally swallowed a cry and turned it into a cough. Sabria stood at the cleat with the tail of the rope in her hand, and for an instant saw every consequence braided together like strands, the barn with its smoke tamed, Bertie asleep with a bean saying 3 to his ear, Mrs. Albright setting dough to rise for a morning that might have to do more than feed, Cato walking the fence with his calm, Hartwell looking for a version of himself the mirror had never produced, and Orrin, her father, her master, stepping toward the bit of night where ownership meets its own reflection and flinches. She felt the river ask a question. She answered it. Sabria pulled. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Sabria pulled. And the dock bent its knee to the river. Orrin Marsh's weight shifted with a surprised grunt that sounded, to Sabria, like the first word a cruel god forgets. The lantern swung wide, then down, then out, throwing a broken fan of light that sliced across the captain's startled face, across Hartwell's open mouth, across the ropes that had been behaving themselves until they were told not to. Wood complained. Nails remembered that they were only iron. The last plank heaved and made a sound like a chest closing on a secret. Pa! Hartwell shouted, the syllable half-boy, half-man. The lantern hit the water and went out with a hiss that raised the hair on Sabria's arms. Oren's boots scuffed, seeking an argument with gravity. For an instant, his hand clutched at empty air where a railing should have been. Then he went into the Patuxent backwards, as if the river had denied him the dignity of seeing it take him. Line, the captain cried, lunging, but Sabria had already slipped the rope free of the cleat and fed it to the current like a sacrifice. The loosened pin's absence became a mouth that swallowed another board. The end of the dock folded again, gentler this time, as if the river were bowing. The splash was not large. Men expect big noises when their power lets go, but the river had other tastes. It took Oren with a soft, greedy sound. Sabria's breath held in her chest until it ached. All the braided consequences tightened at once. She felt Sally's fingers on her sleeve, a small anchor. Hartwell scrambled forward on hands and knees, reached the broken edge, and halted, face stripped of every practiced expression. Pa, he called, and the night gave him crickets in the distant, steady argument of frogs. For a heartbeat the world paused, listening for what it had meant to write next. Sabria tasted copper on her tongue and damp rope in her hands. She could let the river finish what it had started. She could. It would be clean in its way, cleaner than most endings this place offered. But the word that rose in her mouth was not finish. It was reckon. Pole, she said, sudden and sure. Sally startled. What? Pole. Sabria repeated, louder, pointing to the skiff tied 2 posts back, the one the yard men used to fetch floating logs after storms. She sprang to it, fingers fast on the knot, and shoved it toward the slanted end, then shoved Hartwell's stunned shoulder. Take it. He blinked at her as if she had invented language. What? Take the pole and find him. Her voice had a blade's edge. If you mean to call him Pa, earn it. Hartwell grabbed the pole with hands that trembled and jabbed into the water without skill. The captain, shaking free of his own shock, vaulted into the skiff, seized the second pole, and worked it like a man who understood currents. The two of them probed the river's skin while the crew hauled the dock's end a measure flatter with curses that sounded like prayers. The overseer stood paralyzed, the buckets clattering in the distance like bones. Sabria knelt at the broken edge, body low and steady, eyes gauging the run. She saw bubbles slide up, lazy as lies. She saw a sleeve rise and vanish. Downstream, she said, voice flat. The eelgrass holds. Don't fight it crosswise. Angle. She was giving instruction to the man who owned her and to the man who thought himself his heir, and felt, with a dizzying calm, how the world flipped when you looked at it from the water's side. The captain found him first, or rather the river admitted where it had put him. Oren surfaced with a tearing cough, a tangle of eelgrass in his hair like a parody of laurels. He thrashed, the eelgrass is a lover that does not distinguish between embrace and restraint. The captain hooked his collar and hauled while Hartwell jabbed helplessly. Help! Hartwell shouted at Sabria without looking at her, at anyone. Do something. I am, she said quietly, and she was choosing conditions. They hauled Oren to the angled boards, dragging him half atop the dock, where he lay coughing river into the night. He turned, gagging, and found Sabria's face with his eyes. For a heartbeat, which might have been a lifetime if time were fair, neither of them looked away. She did not see a father in his face. She saw a man who mistook owning for loving and obedience for safety, and she saw the small boy under that man, whittled into hardness by a world that paid him for it. Pity rose and then fell away like a wave that knows it is not the tide. Hartwell sprawled beside him, palms on the boards, breathing like a dog that's run too far. Pa. Oren coughed a low laugh that had no humor in it. Doc's rotten, he rasped. Sir, Sabria said, and let the word be formal as a courtroom. Your debt is calling you. He rolled onto his side, spat river, and glared. For a moment, Sabria saw his indulgence reaching for its old seat. Then the captain said, brisk, practical, already calculating the worth of disaster, your barn's smoking like it's got a sermon to preach, Marsh. You want to move your feet. The night snapped back into motion, men sprinting, buckets renewed in their purpose, the overseer finding his bark again like a dog who has remembered its teeth. Sabria rose with them because that is what a woman does when she is both hinge and key, she moves. They saved the barn with blackened rafters, with wet gunny sacks and wheezing. The smoke took the sweat out of everyone and left a sticky gratitude that was not yet ready to feel like thanks. When, at last, the tongue of flame was scolded to ember and the men sagged on their heels, Orrin stood with a blanket around his shoulders and gave orders in a voice that pretended nothing had changed. "Hands to Benedict at first light," he said. "We fetch what the captain needs and settle the talk before it grows taller than it is." He cut a look at Sabria, and the blanket shifted. "Kitchen will sweeten the morning." "Yes, sir," Sabria said, steady, uninflected, and then turned away before he could find a place to wedge more words into her night. Dawn arrived raw and pink, ashamed of how it had been used. Sabria and Sally moved like figures on a clock, biscuits out, coffee on, molasses thinned and warmed. Through it all, Sabria's mind counted the quiet that followed catastrophe, that particular hush when people speak a little softer and reach a little quicker for what they think steadies them. That hush was useful. Bertie needed moving. After the men ate, after the captain took his bread with sailor's efficiency, after the overseer hefted his rope like a man who believed in the future of knots, Sabria found Cato behind the smokehouse rubbing salve into the skin where his shirt had chafed. "You watched the river last night?" she asked. "I watched a man find out it don't care who he is," Cato said. He flexed his hands. "You want me on the fence?" "I want you at Mrs. Albright's," she said. "2 baskets, the big willow ones. One has beans, one has a boy." Cato's mouth twitched. He had the gift of keeping terror from his face when it would frighten others. "And after?" "You'll take the boy to the Willets," Sabria said. "Then to the ferry that don't look like a ferry." "Fog willing," he murmured, as if the fog were a neighbor whose mood mattered. She touched his arm. "Fog willing." As Cato slipped away, Sabria went to the pantry shelf where she kept the small, disguised elements of her alphabet, the paper she had palmed from the mistress's unused stationery box, the stump of a pencil that had been Hartwell's, chewed, forgotten, the nutmeg that stood for numbers, the brittle wedge of charcoal. She wrote a note as if copying a recipe, the words shaped like measures: 2 spoons mercy, 1 cup swiftness, 3 pinches silence, and if the wrong eyes found it, it would make a poor cake. If the right eyes found it, it was a map. Sally slipped in, cheeks flushed from the oven's breath. "Mrs. Marsh is asking for you." Sabria folded the paper into the lining of a bread cloth. "Is she asking or is she announcing?" "The second one." Belinda Marsh was sitting in the parlor, looking at the light as if it had insulted her, which it probably had. Light isn't careful with people's pride. "Sabria," she said without greeting, as if the name were a broom she meant to use. "My drapes stink of smoke." "You will take them down, wash them, and have them back before supper." "Yes, ma'am." Belinda's gaze traveled Sabria's face the way a lady's hand travels lace for snags. "In your jaw," she said, "too cool. It is puffed." "I met a doorpost," Sabria replied. It did not take kindly to being met. "Do not be clever," Belinda said, which meant she had noticed the truth and refused it entry. "There is talk of the churchyard being disturbed. The vestry house lock looks pried." "Locks swell in this weather," Sabria said. "They protest." Belinda sniffed. "Do not bring me the river's excuses. Bring me clean drapes." "Yes, ma'am." On the stairs, Sabria's knees went briefly soft. She sat 2 steps up, hands folded on her apron, and let a single breath shake itself out. Then she stood again, steady, and carried the parlor's curtains down like a woman bearing the weight of someone else's pretense. By noon, Cato was back, clothes ordinary, eyes telling her what words could not afford. Bertie had gone like a message swallowed and carried safe. "Mrs. Albright gave him a string of buttons," he said. "Said he can count a different one every mile." "The Willets?" "Will let." Cato's mouth quirked. "They will and they did." Sabria nodded, feeling the small relief roll through her like a river flea on the skin, tiny, insistent, proof that life was still walking around inside her. Then she heard wheels on gravel and saw two things at once, the marshal's coats and Orrin Marsh's sudden stiffening as if bracing for a blow he could not afford to acknowledge. 3 men dismounted, their coats carrying the smell of other people's houses. The lead one had kind eyes and a cruel mouth, a combination Sabria distrusted more than most. "Mr. Marsh," he said with professional politeness. "We've had some trouble up the North Road, and your name made the rounds." Orrin folded his arms under the blanket he still wore as if humility could be draped. "My name makes rounds whether there's trouble or not," he said. "What's your aim?" "Station keeper gone," the marshal said. "Woman. Took her boy. We think they were run through this parish. Maybe this place." He let his gaze slide over Sabria and Sally and Cato and every person who had learned to make their faces into shutters. "We'll look around." Orrin smiled thinly. "You do your duty." His eyes flicked to Sabria for a short of a second and said what his mouth did not, "Tell me if my money is about to be charged extra for this visit." They searched. They were thorough, but thoroughness is a style, not a guarantee. They peered into the smokehouse and admired the salt. They rapped on the vestry lock and declared it rusty, which it was. They stood on the dock and sniffed the air, which still held a whisper of last night's river. "Had trouble?" the kind-eyed marshal asked, looking at the twisted planks. "Rot," Orrin said. "Rot," the marshal repeated, tasting the word. He did not look at Sabria, and by not looking, he looked. "We'll ask the widow Albright if her beans grew weary of being counted," he said mildly to his men, who smiled without knowing why. When they were gone, the house exhaled, then inhaled again, greedily, as if wanting to pull its old air back into itself. Orrin's gaze found Sabria with the unerring gravity of a habit. "Kitchen," he said. "We're not done." She went, "Because you go until you don't." The schooner took on hands that afternoon, men from other farms whose owners had debts and appetites. Cato was not among them. Sabria had whispered a warning that sent him to the far pasture with a halter and a plausible tale. Hartwell strutted and slumped in alternating gusts, as if ashamed had put a yoke on his shoulders and pride kept lifting it. Near dusk, Sabria slipped to the river again carrying the kettle with the filed lip. She knelt and let the brown water complicate itself in her reflection. She did not pray. She made a list the way a practical mind does when the world offers it both cruelty and opportunity. The marshals would be back. Kind eyes remember. Bertie was a mile from the Willets by now, holding a button and calling it 5. Orrin had swallowed the river and spit it out. A man like that does not break, he ferments. The schooner and the debt were a hinge she could still bend. Red Jacob stepped out of the reeds like a punctuation mark. "You wrote bread," he said without preamble. "I ate it with my eyes." "Good letters." "Did they go?" she asked. "They did. Child is halfway to the ferry already. Woman who kept the station, her sister sent word. She held names in her teeth and never opened her mouth. They'll call that foolishness or bravery depending on whether it cost them money." He looked toward the house, where the windows were learning night. "You changed the river last night." "It changed me," she said. He nodded as if that were the same sentence. "There's talk that Marsh means to sell 2 boys and a man to cover his bath." "Which boys?" "Twins from Jenkins's lot. And Cato." The world narrowed to the sound a kettle makes when it almost boils, an impatient, skeptical job of a noise. Sabria's hand tightened on the handle until her tendons argued. "He won't," she said, and in the saying she began to know the shape of what she would do. "Tell me," Jacob said. He did not say, "Don't." Men who work the river understand that such words are for people who think the world negotiates. She told him in pieces because a plan is easier to carry when it is not all in one basket. Sally will take the mistress a posset that will make her sleep through a storm. Hartwell will drink with the captain to prove he is a man, and that will make him slow. The overseer will hear a fight at the fence and go to scold it. I will set a light where the schooner's hawser looks trustworthy. "And Orrin?" Jacob asked. Sabria did not look away. The river will ask him a question he cannot answer. Jacob breathed out a laugh that wasn't light. Make sure the river isn't also asking you. It always is, she said, and both of them were quiet for the space of one full tide in their heads. Night came. It wore a wind that fussed with skirts and set the crickets to gossip. In the kitchen, Sabria brewed the posset with a nurse's hand, milk, vinegar, honey, and a dust of something Mrs. Albright had tucked into a brown paper twist with the note "Feed this to sleep when sleep refuses to be fed." Not poison, Sabria would not make death for a woman who was a prisoner of her comforts, but a syrup of poppy that made lids heavy and wills agreeable. She took it to Belinda Marsh, who lay on the chaise with a cloth on her forehead that announced suffering the way a flag announces country. For the smoke, Sabria said softly. It eases the scratch. Belinda sipped and made the small noise people make when something they want to resist tastes like relief. Leave me, she murmured, and in the leaving she slept. Sally floated like a leaf through the hall. Hartwell's at the captain's elbow, she whispered. He's saying sir with an extra syllable to see if it will buy him respect. Then we are on time, Sabria said. She took the lantern and a coil of rope and went to the river with a pace that looked like someone going to check on a mooring, because that is exactly what she was doing. The schooner sulked against the pilings, wanting more attention than it had been given. Its hawser hugged the bollard with the arrogance of a fat snake. Sabria set her lantern on the post, shielded, and ran her hand along the fibers. She found the spot where heat had eaten strength. Rope dies from the inside out when left cruelly in sun. She took her knife, the one whose handle was worn to her hand's shape, and worried at the hawser like a patient mouse, then hid what she had done with a twist that any sailor would call neat. Steps on the path. Voices. Sabria set her face to neutral, the way a good poker player sets a hand to idle. Orrin and the captain came, Hartwell bobbing behind like a man's reflection trying to catch up to his stride. Dawn, the captain was saying. We'll catch more wind. Earlier, Orrin insisted. I want it done while the marshals snore. He glanced at Sabria. What are you doing there? Tightening, she said, and gave the rope a final, convincingly busy pat. She stood, lantern throwing her shadow long on the planks. Wind frayed your line today, sir. Everything frays, Orrin said with a smile that meant no. You learn to make it someone else's problem. Sabria let the word problem pass over her without entering. I'll set coffee, she said, and went back up the path with the lantern hugged to her ribs where its light could not show her thoughts. She had nearly reached the kitchen door when the marshals came again. The kind-eyed one tapped his hat brim, and the gesture looked both respectful and practiced. Evening, miss, he said, not to Sabria, who did not have miss for mornings or evenings, but to the house he thought she represented. We had us a notion. Orrin stiffened without turning his head. Hartwell tried to become the shape of the air behind him. The captain's eyes went narrow with arithmetic. A notion? Orrin said, too casual. That lock at St. Luke's, the marshal replied. It does swell, as a gentleman said earlier. But it swells less when oiled. And somebody oiled it. He smiled with his kind eyes. We'd like a word with your kitchen girl who knows about swelling. Sabria did not flinch. She set the lantern down. You can have a word with the river, she said, and walked toward it as if she meant to introduce them. The marshal followed, hands loose, his men behind him not as loose. You have a way with doors, he said. I have a way with hinges, Sabria corrected. So things that should open can, and things that should stay shut learn manners. He took that in, and his mouth did a thing that suggested he had not expected her to be handsome with language. There was a boy, he said. We don't aim to haul him back into trouble. Sabria looked at him and let the stillness fill with meaning. Then don't. He nodded as if she had passed a test only he knew the terms of. We heard the widow Albright's beans kicked up. We're inclined to let beans be beans. He tilted his head toward the dock. But we can't let rope be rope if it was knife yesterday. Orrin barked a laugh. You planning to arrest my moorings? Just seeing how they behave, the marshal said mildly. Sometimes a man's rope tells more truth than his mouth. Sabria walked to the bollard like a woman tending ordinary chores and laid her hand on the hawser. The frayed heart lay under her palm like a confession. She could feel the men's attention gathering in small iron filings around her. She took hold of the husk she had left and pulled, slow, then faster. The hawser coughed half its grip free and slid a mean inch. Careful, the captain snapped, and stepped forward. Sabria gave the hawser a conspirator's look. You behave now, she murmured, and tucked the tuck she had made deeper. Then, as if nothing had happened, she picked up her lantern and faced the marshal. You've had your word with the hinge, she said. Let the door be. He smiled, brief. We will, for tonight. He looked at Orrin. You keep to your own rot, Mr. Marsh. Leave the vestry to God. Orrin's eyes cut Sabria. I keep to what's mine. Sabria held his gaze. So do I. Dawn arrived a second time bearing different promises. The captain's men cast off with a grunt. The hawser held until the river asked it one of Sabria's questions. It answered by letting go. The schooner lurched in a way that made men shout and leap and use the words they use when their pride is wet. The bow swung wide, the stern kissed the pilings with a hollow thok that sounded like a door being told it had spoken out of turn. Orrin swore. Hartwell swore after him, smaller, delayed. Sabria stood at the path's bend with her apron folded in her fists and looked like a woman cataloging lamentable accidents. The captain hopped, cursed, commanded. Lines, he shouted, and men scrambled, but the current had opinions, and where the current has opinions, men have lessons to learn. In the scramble, Cato, who had appeared from nowhere with a halter that no longer needed a horse, slipped to Sabria's side. He means to sell me by noon, he said in a voice as calm as Sunday. He told Jenkins he'd have me ready. Then we move before noon, Sabria said. Her own calm shocked her a little. Take the back path to the old ferry. Jacob will meet you under the sycamore. If anyone asks, you're fetching the mare that took lame last month. What about you? I'm going to make noon busy, she said. Cato squeezed her hand. His palm was warm and unforgiving of despair. I'll see you on the other side of a song, he murmured, and was gone. Sabria went to the kitchen. She packed bread, cheese, a flask. She tied a bundle for herself that looked like a bundle for someone else. She placed the mistress's drapes, newly washed, on the line where they would announce obedience. Then she walked into the yard and found Orrin Marsh by the tack shed, where he was telling a man how to value another man's body. Sir, she said, and the word had in it the cool of river at morning. You owe me a word. He turned, eyebrows raised at the insolence of the notion that he could owe anything to a woman who was not paid. Do I, he said. You put your hand on my jaw last night, Sabria said evenly, and on my name many nights before that with the way you play it in your mouth. I want you to hear what it tastes like when I say it. My name is Sabria Lark. Sabria. Lark. There is no yours in it. Men nearby went still. Hartwell, hovering, looked scared for reasons he did not understand. Orrin smiled the smile that had gotten him credit when his field didn't earn it. That's so. It is. She stepped close enough to count the gold flecks in his eyes and see how dull they had become with drink and the belief that drink can do anything but add. You will not sell Cato today. I will sell who I please, he said softly. You will make custard. No, she said, and the word had no ornament. You will go to the river with me. He laughed, surprised, genuinely amused at the absurdity of a thing he could not yet tell would kill him. Girl, he said, and the word stumbled on his teeth, you think. I think, Sabria said, her voice low enough to be private in a crowd, that the river puts truth in men's mouths if they kneel at it. You know something of kneeling. Color rose on his neck. He took a step closer, and that step put them in a small, electric bubble where the world watched and yet did not interfere. You should be grateful I let you keep your tongue. You tried to keep it for yourself, she said, and watched rage rearrange his face into the shape she had known as a child, the shape that had leaned over her in doorways and in kitchens and in the barn with a world's worth of entitlement sitting like a crown on his head. He reached for her arm. She let him. She turned with his grip and guided it the way you guide a skiff, not fighting, correcting. To the river, she said. They walked. Behind them, the yard resumed its theater, men loading, men pretending not to see, women carrying bowls like shields. Hartwell followed at a distance, frowning as if the act might become a skill if he practiced. The marshal, who had the gift of arriving when a scene reached the point where it mattered, appeared with his coat open like a man prepared to look plain. "Morning," he said. "Marshal," Orrin said, not pausing. "I have business." "So I gather," the marshal murmured to the air. At the dock's bend, Sabria stopped. Orrin stopped because his body needed to in order to continue to feel in charge. The river, cool, indifferent, went about its long task of changing the land. "Kneel," Sabria said. "You forget yourself," he said. "No," she said. "I remember." Hartwell shifted behind them, unsure whether to be scandalized or aroused by the shape of power in the air. The marshal's eyes sharpened. A heron lifted from the far bank and dragged its shadow across all of them. Orrin smiled in the way he smiled before he did what he wanted. "And if I don't? Then I will tell the river something that belongs to it," she said, and her hand went to the rope curled in a tidy heap on the dock's edge, the rope he had ordered coiled, the rope she had told to pretend. She did not pick it up. She only let him see that she knew how to touch it. He knelt. It was grudging and it was clumsy, but it was kneeling. He leaned over the edge, the Patuxent breathing up into his face. "What truth you think it will give me?" he asked, mocking to cover the small quiver in his voice. "The kind you sell to other men," she said. "The kind you never buy." She stood over him, the sun finding the line of her jaw he had bruised. "Say my name." He laughed. "Sabria." He made it a sneer. "Lark." He said it like a command. "Satisfied?" "No," she said, and her voice went down a step that made Hartwell flinch. "Say whose daughter I am." Silence made a circle around them. "You think I'll give you," Orrin began, fury lifting him an inch. She put her foot on the small of his back when he rose, gentle, unmistakable. He froze from the shock of that intimacy. "Say it," she said, and the river waited, and the marshal did not breathe because breath has a sound and sound can push a moment one direction or another. Orrin whispered, "Mine," like a man tasting ash. Louder. "Mine," he said, louder, and in the saying he became smaller because the word rearranged him in front of other men. "I said it." "Then hear me say this," Sabria said, and bent so her mouth was close to his ear. "I am not." She pressed, not hard, not theatrically, just enough to make his balance speak the truth. He was at an edge he did not control. His hands went out to the water as if it were a wall that could hold him up, and for a second their positions happened again, the night before, the eelgrass, the cough. The river flashed an old coin of light and asked its question. Sabria stepped back. She did not push him. She left him in the care of the choice he had made by kneeling at a place where the bank sloped and the planks ended stupidly. He recovered himself with a lunge and whirled on her, face naked with something that would have been shame if he had learned how to hold it. "You dare," he said, and reached. A new voice cut, cool and practical. "Mr. Marsh," the marshal said, stepping to where Law stood on a crack and pretended it was a stage. "You have said enough to satisfy my paper. I heard what I needed." He lifted a hand. "No use thrashing a river. It doesn't file complaints." Orrin's stare went wild and then narrow. He looked at Sabria, at the marshal, at Hartwell, at the captain pretending to be busy with ropes that had learned humility. He did the thing men do when they realize the story has moved on without their permission. He tried to force it backwards with his hands. He lunged. Sabria moved sideways, letting the lunge carry him past. His boot, finding the place where last night's loosened pin had made a small dishonesty in the boards, slipped. He grabbed at a post and found only splinters. Then he was in the river a second time, and this time the eelgrass took him with recognition. "Line," the captain yelled again, generous and furious. Hartwell fumbled, slipped, fell to his knees and tried to remember where his hands kept their strength. The marshal, to his credit, threw his coat and went for the pole. Sabria did not move. Her stillness was not cruelty, it was witness. The river rolled. Orrin came up once, eyes wide against a face that looked young for the first and last time. He looked at Sabria. She looked back and gave him no permission to call her what he had made her. He went under. The Patuxent closed its mouth. They dragged for him. They did the motions that keep a town from having to confess what it wanted. They found him on a route, as if the land itself had reached in and snagged him. They put him on the dock, and a man whom the captain swore by beat at him the rhythm men have agreed is the beat that keeps breath obedient. He did not obey. Hartwell made a sound that was new to him. Sabria had heard it before, in women, in the dark, when their bodies remembered things they had not consented to. It was grief and anger knotted and set on fire. The marshal stood, chest heaving, face set to official. "Accident," he said, and the word opened its jaw as wide as it needed to swallow the day. "Rot in the boards." He met Sabria's gaze and did not blink. "I'll write it so." Sabria inclined her head. She did not say thank you. Mercy that costs a woman her rage is not a thing to name with gratitude. "Cato is not to be sold today," she said. Hartwell looked at her as if seeing her shape for the first time separate from the furniture of his life. Then he looked down at his father. Something quick moved in his eyes, fear of being the next assailable thing, fear of living without the definition cruelty had given him. He swallowed. "No," he said hoarsely. "No one is sold today." "Or tomorrow," Sabria added. His jaw tightened. "Or tomorrow." He did not look at her when he said it, which made the pledge more sincere. The house mourned in the way houses learn from the people who build them. Belinda lay in a dim room and accepted smelling salts like the neck itches women accept when they have run out of words. The neighbors came with pies and questions and practiced consolations that let them measure their own safety. The captain suggested, with commercial tact, that funerals buy tobacco, too. Sabria moved through the rooms like a hinge that had taken itself off and examined its purpose and then put itself back with intention. She served coffee. She took condolences and set them on plates where they could do no harm. She listened to Hartwell's new voice try to locate its true pitch. At dusk, she went to the river. Jacob waited there because he had known she would, because men who listen to reeds learn a woman's footsteps the way they learn the wind's. "It happened," he said, quiet. "It did," she said. He did not ask for a description. He looked at her jaw, which had gone yellow at the edges where purple had been. "You're seen now," he said. "Not just by us, but by the kind that write things down. Mind your letters." "I will," she said. "And the boy?" "Counting buttons. Maybe calling one by my name." She smiled, small and wide at once. "He will live where a river tells different kinds of truth." Jacob exhaled. "Cato's across. He sent me to put this in your hand." He gave her a penny with a nick in it where some small child had tried to see if it would bleed copper. Said, "Tell Sabria the world didn't flip yet but it leaned. And I found a place to put my foot when it does." Sabria turned the coin with her thumb. "Good," she said. "Tomorrow, we pull the drapes down again and tell the sun where it may fall." "You could run," Jacob offered, not the first time, but the first time he believed she might say yes. "Now that the house is blind in one eye." Sabria looked at the quarter moon lying on the river like a small, careless promise. "I will," she said. "But not alone. Not as smoke. As a door opening." She considered the shore, the dock, the patched planks that had been honest for once. "I have names to write out of debt." Days braided themselves into a rope that held. Hartwell faltered, blustered, and surprised himself by listening when Sabria told him the kitchen needed less lie and more mercy. Belinda shrank to a set of gestures and then, in one small flaring, reached for Sabria's hand and held it as a woman holds another woman when the world has been loud and all she wants is a moment of quiet. He was not kind, she said in a whisper that made Sabria feel both pity and the slow cold of strategy. No, Sabria said. He was not. Belinda's eyes sought hers. You will keep the house until things are arranged. I will keep people, Sabria corrected gently. The house will keep itself if we do. Belinda closed her eyes and let that be an arrangement. The marshal came and went with papers that looked like power until you asked them to do something hard. He did not look toward the vestry again. He nodded at Sabria like a man who had seen a woman lift a beam and decided not to make a spectacle out of it. Sabria wrote. She wrote in ways that looked like inventories and recipes and needle lists. She wrote names in layers, a girl with a scar on her left thumb, a man who sang to horses, twins who timed their breaths to fool a whip. She wrote routes that tasted like cinnamon if you licked them with your mind, to the ferry or to the marsh road or to the widow's laundry. She wrote letters to the river, too, in her head, which is where the best letters learn patience. And then, on a morning that opened with coolness like an apology, she told Sally to pack 2 baskets, the willow ones. We will fetch apples, she said in the hearing of ears that needed to hear it. To Sally, under breath, she said, we will fetch women. They took the north path, which had learned to look like nothing. In the shade under the sycamore, 3 faces waited, a mother with a fierce softness in her eyes, a girl whose hair dragged its stubborn glory behind her, and a woman with a baby who had learned to sleep through arguments. Sabria stood in front of them and told them the only promise she could stand to make. No heroics, she said. Only work. Work like dough and rope and words. We will move as if we were not moving. The girl lifted her chin. What if the river asks us a question? Sabria smiled, a little. We will answer it with our names. The day the house changed titles was a day like any other to the sun. Papers were signed. Hartwell put trembling pen to trembling lines. Belinda looked past everyone to a place on the wall where perhaps a different life was hung in a frame. The captain shook hands in a way that sold futures by the inch. The marshal watched the signatures accumulate with the tired air of a man who has been asked to bless a wagon just before it goes off a known cliff. Sabria was in the kitchen teaching Sally to write steam into a window pane and then wipe it away, leaving behind the faintest ghost of a route. Practice making it so light only the right sun shows it, she said. Practice erasing it so if the wrong eyes tilt their head, they see only their own foolishness. Miss Lark, Sally whispered. When do you go? When everyone who wants to step onto the river's back has done it, Sabria said. Then I'll go. Then I'll walk north and let the Patuxent talk to me from behind. She touched the place on her jaw where the yellow had finally gone to nothing. I'll go with my name in my mouth, correct for once. Hartwell came to the doorway and did not clear his throat because he had learned that the sound made him feel more important than he was. There's a man, he said, wants to buy Cato's little cousin. Sally stiffened. Sabria set down her cloth. And what do you want? She asked him. Hartwell looked at his hands as if they might be writing notes to him. I want to be done with selling, he said, and the admission left him raw. I want to know how to say no when it costs me. Then practice, Sabria said. Say it now. He swallowed. No. Again. No. Louder. He went to the front and said it where it could be heard, and the man, who had a face like a shoe left in rain, shrugged and went to the next house, and Sabria knew then that the rope had leaned another inch toward a tree that could hold the weight of a whole town's change if someone kept tying it. Night. The last one. Sabria stood on the dock with the bundle that looked like someone else's bundle and looked like hers. Jacob waited in the skiff. The sycamore stood with the patience of trees that have watched men's better and worse ideas. The river breathed its old, complicated breath. Sally came down the path with tears she was not letting fall yet. You'll send a letter, she said, the way you send bread? I'll send bread, Sabria said. Letters can be stolen, but bread makes a thief feed someone. She touched Sally's cheek. You write now. Don't just read. Write so that if someone takes your words, they get a mouthful of work they don't understand. Cato stepped from the reeds like an answer. Fairies quiet. Fog's a friend. He took Sabria's bundle and placed it in the skiff with the reverence of a deacon setting down a hymnal. You sure? She looked back up the path to the house that had tried to teach her how to be small and had failed. She did not forgive it. She did not hate it. She put it where it belonged, a structure full of people who could choose to be better or worse tomorrow. I'm sure, she said. Hartwell appeared at the bend, breathless. Wait, he said. He faltered, then found his words. I put your name in the book. Sabria tilted her head. What book? The book Pa kept. I put it on the page where he kept debts. I wrote, Sabria Lark, paid. And then I turned the page. And I wrote, Sabria Lark, free. She stood very still. Paper is a thin thing to trust, but names on paper can bend iron if you read them aloud in the right room. Keep the book safe, she said. Learn how to mean it with your hands. He nodded. I'll try. The trying made him look more like a person than any of his shirts ever had. He stepped back. Go. Sabria stepped into the skiff. Jacob pushed off. Cato took the second pole. The river accepted them without comment and with all the hospitality of a thing that has known your feet since you were a child. Reeds brushed by. Frogs made their small volunteer vows. Midstream, Jacob said, name the stars. Sabria smiled. I don't need the sky tonight, she said. I have the river's alphabet. She closed her eyes and felt the current write it on her skin, the loop that meant bend, the dash that meant hidden snag, the long line that meant distance you've earned rather than distance you've been given. She opened her eyes. I will make a door, she said to them, to the water, to the night. I will hold it. I will stand in it until others have walked through. Then I will walk, too. The skiff slid. The sycamore bowed. On the far bank, a lantern winked twice in the pattern Sabria had cut into the top of a loaf months ago. Welcome, hurry. She did not look back again. She looked forward and let the river ask its question one more time. She answered with her name. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.